Can these bones live? What will life look like after this? What will happen after the coronavirus has extracted its toll on our lives, on our communities, and on our world? What will things look like? What will our life be like? Will things go back to the way they were before? Will our work, will our lives, will our families go back to normal? I imagine there are a lot of things that we do wish would just go back to normal. That we could go out to eat, that we could go to the stores we want and need to go to, that our kids could go back to school, that we could go to the playground and play with our friends, that we could do all those things. We want those things to go back to normal. And more seriously, we want there to be an end to this virus, to the devastation it's causing, to the anxiety that it makes us feel, to the frustration that comes with it, and to all of the suffering that has come along with it. We don't want that to continue. But maybe in this there are things that we don't want to go back to normal. Maybe there are things that we wish wouldn't come back after this virus has done everything it's going to do. For those of you who hate shaking hands, you probably wish that that would never come back even after the virus is done, right? Or those of you who are worried about a lot of hygiene things, that we would change the way we do things after this. But maybe there are deeper things too. I always hope and pray that after times like this, that we would become kinder to one another, that we would start to see others and their suffering as important, that we would see other people just as human as we are. I pray that we'd be more attentive to one another's needs, and that we'd be quicker to embrace kindness and mercy. Will any of this happen after things go back? Today we come to this question in the book of Ezekiel. And during the days of this prophet Ezekiel, God's people, they were exiled from their land. They were conquered by an enemy army. Their homes and their temple were destroyed. They were forced to become refugees and settlers in another person's land, and they lost everything. They lost their identity. They lost their homes. They lost their purpose. They lost their hope. They had become like a valley of dry bones scattered. There was no sign of life in them, just a ground littered with skeletons. Now, for those of you who have seen The Lion King, when I hear of this valley of dry bones, I think of the elephant graveyard. You remember the elephant graveyard where Simba and Nala, they end up and they meet the hyenas and they get in lots of trouble and Mufasa has to come and rescue them? That's what I think of when I hear this. Now, for those of you kids watching today, this valley of dry bones seems kind of strange, maybe even a little bit scary. But it's important for us to remember that this is a vision that Ezekiel has. A vision is kind of like a dream. It's like a dream where God is talking to Ezekiel. And we know that dreams can sometimes be strange, right? Think of all the strange dreams you've had. Dreams can sometimes be confusing. And this is definitely true for old Ezekiel. He had a vision, a dream of a valley filled with dry bones, like an elephant graveyard. Now, skeletons, bones, they're different than ghosts. In most ghost stories that we read about in books and in movies, ghosts are spirits without bodies. They're spirits who are there for some reason or some purpose. Maybe the ghost was someone whose life ended because injustice, and they're sticking around to make sure they get their justice. Sometimes a ghost has a task to do before they can rest. A ghost has some purpose and meaning in the world. In these stories, ghosts are spirits whose lives weren't finished yet. They had more of their story to live. Their story wasn't complete. And so they haunted houses and people to try to complete their stories. But here in Ezekiel's vision, these aren't ghosts. These are bones. If ghosts are spirits without bodies, these are bodies without any spirit, without any life, without any purpose, without any meaning. These bones aren't asking the question, what comes after this? Because for these bones, there is nothing left to ask about. There is no after this. This is the image that Ezekiel sees in his vision. He sees a valley filled with bones whose life and purpose and meaning and hope are all dried up. And God asks Ezekiel, Ezekiel, mortal, son of man, can these bones live? Can these dry bones live again? Can these piles of meaninglessness and hopelessness come back to life? Of course, the answer to this is simple. Can a bunch of old bones come back to life in a valley? No, they can't. That is how the people of Israel felt about their situation in exile. Could their lives be restored to the way they were before? No. Their lives, their hopes and dreams had become like dry bones, and can skeletons live again? Can their lives be reassembled and put back to the way they were? Today, I think this is our question. Can these bones live again? What's next for us? What's next for our world? Can things go back to the way they were? This question is deeper than our current situation with COVID-19, the virus. It's a question that looms over us whenever we see the world as it is. It's a question that comes to us during seasons of loss in our life. Can our lives continue after we lose a job? After we lose a loved one? Can they continue after some tragedy happens in our life? What will life look like afterwards? And then ultimately this question faces us when we must face our own end, our own mortality. Not just our mortality, but the mortality of this earth that we live on. When we see the grass of the field that is here today and gone tomorrow, we are asked, just as Ezekiel is asked, can these bones live? Now at this point, we usually want to jump right to the good part of the story, right? We want to jump to this part of the story we know is coming, where the Spirit comes and puts all these bones back together, then breathes life into them. But we would do well to learn from Ezekiel. Ezekiel is smart enough to know that he doesn't have an answer to God's question. God asked him, can these bones live? What's next? Ezekiel doesn't know. And we don't know either. Right now, I don't know what this current pandemic will mean for the future of our country and our world. In our country, right now, we're only just now starting to see the severity of it. Even this weekend, hospitals in our own state are becoming more stressed and tired, and the workers are having a huge burden put on them. It's hard to know what this will all mean. Also, when it comes to other things in our lives, we don't know what it'll look like. We don't know what things will look like next year or the year after that. What will our work look like? What will our farms look like? Our families, our homes, what will they look like after this, whatever this is? We don't know. So Ezekiel takes his unknowing, he takes the question that God gives him, can these bones live? And he gives that question back to God. You know, Ezekiel says, God, only you know if these bones can live again. Only you know what can happen after all of this. Ezekiel's response makes us pause for a moment. It makes us pause and not jump ahead to the part where the bones come back to life. It makes us pause and experience the real grief of the situation that we're in. When we don't know what to happen, and when there's very little we can do, all we can do is pause and wait. All we can do is give our questions that we have back to God. Can these bones live? This pause, this moment of waiting, it happens not only all throughout our lives, but all throughout the Bible as well. It's in the story of Jesus when his friend Lazarus becomes sick and dies. Before the miraculous raising of Lazarus from the dead, there's a pause. And in this pause, Jesus weeps and mourns with his friends for his friend. It's also in the story that we're going to remember in just a little over a week, the story of Good Friday, the day we remember the death of Jesus on a Roman cross. On Good Friday, we pause and we sit with all of our questions and all of our uncertainty. We look at the cross and we ask, can these bones live? Is there hope for this cruel and hard world? Is there hope for our broken and troubled lives? Is there justice? Is there peace? In the end, what will become of all of this? And before we come to any answer, before we come to the answer of Easter, before we come to the answer at the end of Ezekiel 37, we must face these questions. We, like Ezekiel, must turn these questions back to God and then wait. God, only you know if these bones could live. As with much of our life and much of the world, there is very little that we can do. Very little that we can do but wait. wait for an answer, wait to see what happens, or just wait and grieve because we don't know what else to do. And in this time of waiting, we also think about our own lives. This is what was happening in Ezekiel's day. You see, long before Ezekiel had this vision of dry bones in the valley, God gave Ezekiel another dream, another vision. And this vision came at the beginning of the story, before Israel ever went into exile, before Israel lost their homes, before they had that moment of suffering and pain. God gave Ezekiel a vision in this very same valley. But at the beginning of the story, Ezekiel's first vision in this valley is not filled with bones. God's people are not yet in exile. Back at the beginning of the story, their lives were normal. But their hearts had become cold. Their lives had become cruel. They had wealth, but not love. They had land, but not room in their lives for God or for other people. Even back then, though the people were alive, they seemed like bones that were dried up. But in this moment of waiting, God's question lingers in the air. Can these bones live? And with this, there's another question that comes along with it. How should these bones live? Should they live in the same way they did before the valley became filled with them? If they were given life again, if they were restored, how would they live? How many of us wish that people would be nicer to each other after we all come out of quarantine, realizing that we share more in common than difference? How many of us want not to take our friends or our family for granted, the time we get to spend with one another? Maybe this time has made us contemplate our need for God's grace or God's mercy. How will our dried up bones live again if they're given a chance? So today, take a moment to ask these questions to yourselves. Ask them with your loved ones, your family. Can these bones live? Where in your life have you lost hope? Where are things fraying and falling apart? Where do you have more questions than answers? As you look across our town, our country, and our world, where do you see valleys of dry bones? Where do you see places where there is no life and no spirit? And what might it mean for these places to be given life again? How might our lives and our world look different were we to rise up out of that valley? Can these bones live? God, only you know. Then God said to me, say to these bones, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God to these bones, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live. I will lay sinews on you, and will cause flesh to come on you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live. And you shall know that I am the Lord. Now you say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is lost. We are cut off completely. But I, the Lord your God, will say, I am going to open your graves, and bring you up from your graves, O my people. And I will bring you back to the land that is yours. And you shall know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from your graves, O people. And then I will put my spirit within you, and you shall live. And I will place you on your own soil. And then you shall know that I, the Lord, will have spoken and acted. Amen.